Have you ever caught yourself wondering why, time and again, certain patterns seem to unfold in relationships? Like an unseen hand, gently, or sometimes not so gently, guiding choices without us even realizing it. It's as if there's a hidden script written deep inside, nudging women toward men who act in very specific ways. And no, this isn't just about superficial preferences or societal trends. There's something far more intricate at play. Let me take you back to a late spring afternoon in 2023. I was sitting at a bustling cafe in Brooklyn, the aroma of roasted coffee beans mixing with the faint scent of rain against the window pane. Across from me was Lisa, a 29-year-old graphic designer who had just come out of a long-term relationship. She said, almost resignedly, "I keep choosing men who, well, they don't really listen. They say all the right things, but then disappear when things get real. At first, I thought it was just bad luck, or maybe poor judgment. But as we talked deeper, it became clear there was something more complex, patterns repeating themselves like echoes from an old song. What Lisa didn't know was that her choices were not random, but deeply connected to how women's psychology has been shaped over thousands of years. More precisely, how certain behaviors trigger unconscious responses that feel safe or familiar, even if they cause pain later on. It's like being programmed by invisible codes embedded in human nature. So here's what we'll do. Today, we're unraveling the first part of this hidden programming: why women often pick men who exhibit what I'll call the avoidance stance. And before you think this is all heavy stuff meant for psychologists only, stick with me, because I promise there's something practical here for everyone wondering why love feels like a puzzle missing pieces. Now imagine Maria. She's a 34-year-old school teacher living in Austin who recently ended things with Jake after 3 years together. Jake seemed perfect on paper. Charming at parties, supportive in public, but when Maria needed emotional closeness or vulnerability from him, Jake would suddenly become distant or distracted. Not intentionally cruel, more like stepping back into an invisible bubble where feelings were too much work. Maria felt frustrated, but also strangely drawn to that distance. This dynamic isn't about blaming Jake or Maria. It's about recognizing something Jung noticed long ago. People are attracted to traits that mirror parts of themselves, sometimes parts they've disowned or don't fully understand yet. In this case, Maria's attraction to Jake reflected her own inner conflict between wanting connection and fearing it at the same time. A push and pull rooted in early experiences and archetypal patterns shared across humanity. The man who avoids emotionally mirrors the woman's own unconscious hesitation about intimacy. Carl Jung described archetypes as universal images and themes residing in our collective unconscious, meaning these are patterns everyone carries inside them, regardless of culture or time period. The avoidant lover is one such pattern appearing again and again because it resonates with fundamental human fears: vulnerability versus safety, closeness versus autonomy. So how does this explain why women might repeatedly choose men who seem emotionally unavailable? It comes down to familiarity disguised as attraction. When someone behaves unpredictably or withholds affection, it can mimic early relational dynamics: a parent who was inconsistent or emotionally distant, which paradoxically feels like home despite its discomfort. It reminds me of an observation I made during a conversation with Hannah, a 27-year-old marketing specialist living near Seoul's Han River last fall. She described dating someone new who suddenly stopped answering texts for days at a time without explanation. Instead of angering her outright, which she expected, she found herself feeling anxious and oddly compelled to reach out more, not because she wanted drama, but because the silence triggered something deep inside her that she couldn't quite name. This kind of attachment style is often labeled anxious avoidant, but here is where things get interesting. Instead of focusing only on labels, let's look at how this pattern operates beneath awareness. The brain responds to uncertainty by seeking control, even if that control is illusory. And familiarity often masquerades as safety when survival instincts kick in. So the man pulling away activates an internal script that says, I need to fix this, I need to be close, even though rationally it might not make sense. But why would anyone want to chase after pain? Because pain itself becomes familiar. It signals known territory where change feels risky. Now, here comes an exercise you can try, not as therapy, but as self-exploration. The next time you notice yourself feeling drawn towards someone who keeps their distance emotionally or behaves inconsistently, pause for a moment before rushing toward connection. Ask yourself quietly, what feelings does this remind me of from my past? Is there a part of me that feels safer when things are uncertain or difficult? Write down whatever comes up without judgment. Maybe memories from childhood where love felt conditional or unpredictable. This isn't about blaming anyone, but about becoming curious about your own internal landscape. Afterward, consider what you truly want from relationships, not just what feels familiar, and imagine how your life might look if you allowed yourself to seek partners embodying steadiness rather than unpredictability. It sounds simple, but can be surprisingly challenging because these patterns run deep beneath conscious thought, and recognizing them is the first step toward freedom from repetition. On another note, and I say this knowing many will relate, figuring out all this while juggling daily life feels almost comical sometimes, like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while riding a subway during rush hour. And yes, I tried once. Spoiler, no prize. Relationships are messy precisely because humans aren't robots programmed for perfection. They're beautifully flawed creatures, shaped by history and biology and stories told around dinner tables. So if any of this resonates or sparks questions for you, subscribe to the channel. We're going to explore these themes more deeply together over time, because understanding these invisible threads helps us rewrite our story with more awareness and compassion. To wrap up this part, let's think again about Maria and Jake. Maria realized through reflection that Jake wasn't just avoiding her, he was triggering an old fear inside herself around being seen too deeply or losing independence. This insight didn't instantly fix their relationship, but opened space for her to choose differently next time, to look beyond charm toward genuine emotional availability. What happened next surprised her. She started seeking friendships where honesty and steady presence mattered most, and those connections brought unexpected peace she hadn't anticipated. Keep that image. It will come back later with new layers as we move forward. And hey, if you find yourself stuck choosing people like Jake or feeling pulled into dramas similar to Lisa's story at the Brooklyn Cafe, that curiosity alone is powerful enough to start changing your path today. Because wanting love is natural. Wanting healthy love means asking questions others don't always ask aloud. Speaking of which, have you ever noticed how some people seem magnetically drawn toward chaos while others avoid it at all costs? That could be part 2, but let's save that surprise for next time before we stray too far off course here. For now, remember, recognizing the avoidance dance isn't about blaming yourself or others. It's about shining light into shadowy places, so choices become clearer rather than automatic reactions passed down silently through generations. And if reflecting on these stories stirs up anything unexpected, a thought bubble popping midday, or an emotion lurking behind routine, you're right where you need to be. Sometimes discomfort signals growth, starting quietly beneath everyday moments, the quiet before transformation. Not unlike waiting for rain after months of drought. And yes, I'm mixing metaphors now. But let me leave you with one final thought for today. When attraction pulls us towards someone elusive or emotionally distant, it isn't random chance. It's an invitation from within to look closer at what we've long ignored inside ourselves, the parts craving both freedom and connection, but unsure how they fit together yet. If that touches something inside you or raises questions hard to answer alone, I'd love hearing your experience below, because sharing stories helps unravel those invisible scripts faster than going solo ever could. With that said, thanks for being here right now. To lean into curiosity instead of comfort zones takes courage no algorithm can replicate yet, though maybe someday TikTok will try. See you soon in part 2, where we dive into another surprising reason behind these relationship choices and uncover more practical ways you can gently shift your path without pressure or self-judgment. Until then, keep noticing those subtle pulls. It might feel frustrating now, but trust me, it's exactly where deeper understanding begins. If you'd like me to continue with step 2 whenever you're ready. It's fascinating how the first piece of this puzzle, the magnetic pull toward emotional avoidance, sets the stage for what often follows next, almost like a dance that shifts into a different rhythm. Because once that initial tension between wanting closeness and fearing it settles in, another layer starts to unfold. The way women can be drawn to men who mirror an unresolved internal conflict around power and control. But this isn't about domination or outright abuse. It's subtler, wrapped in everyday interactions and emotional dynamics that feel both familiar and frustrating. Think of Naomi, a 31-year-old nurse living in Boston's South End. Naomi recently shared with me how she kept choosing partners who would switch between moments of warmth and sudden detachment, not because they were unkind, but because they seemed to wrestle with their own need to assert control over situations. She described feeling caught in a push-pull, where her partner would insist on making decisions without consulting her, then apologize profusely afterward, creating a cycle she couldn't quite break free from. What Naomi didn't realize was that these men were often reflecting something deep within her own psyche, a tug of war between independence and surrender that she hadn't fully acknowledged. Jung might say this connects with what he called the animus, which represents the unconscious masculine part within every woman. This internal figure can sometimes carry conflicting impulses. On one hand, a desire for strength and autonomy. On the other, an urge to yield or merge with another. So why does this matter for who women choose? Because relationships often serve as mirrors, reflecting parts of ourselves we haven't fully integrated or accepted. When a woman has unresolved tension around personal power, maybe growing up in an environment where she had to be overly responsible or suppress her voice, she might unconsciously seek men whose behavior triggers that same dynamic. The relationship then becomes a stage where those inner conflicts play out externally. Naomi's story reminded me of how these patterns show up quietly yet persistently. One afternoon in March 2024, we sat overlooking the Charles River during an unusually warm day for early spring. The cherry blossoms just starting to bloom, but still fragile against the chilly breeze. As we talked, Naomi described how her latest boyfriend's tendency to make decisions for her own good made her feel both cared for and smothered at once. At first, this contradiction puzzled her. Why would she feel trapped by someone who seemed well-intentioned? Here lies the twist. Sometimes what feels like care can also echo messages from childhood about needing permission or approval to express oneself fully. Now here's something practical you can try if you recognize this pattern in your own life. Next time you notice your partner or potential partner taking charge in ways that leave you feeling off balance or unheard, pause and gently check inside. Am I okay with this? Where does this feeling come from? Try journaling about moments when you felt your voice wasn't valued growing up, or times when you had to put others' needs ahead of your own simply to keep peace. This is not about blaming anyone. It's about uncovering hidden beliefs shaping your reactions today. After writing, take a moment to imagine what it would feel like to speak up authentically without fear of rejection or conflict, and whether your current relationship supports or stifles that growth. This little exercise plants seeds of awareness essential for breaking cycles tied to unexpressed parts within ourselves, those inner animus conflicts Jung hinted at long ago. On a lighter note, and I say this because Naomi laughed when she told me, the whole situation sometimes felt like starring in a sitcom titled Who Gets Control Today? Spoiler alert, no one wins when both sides are competing silently. Humor helped soften the edges enough for her to begin questioning old roles instead of resigning herself to them. Moving forward naturally from there leads us to another surprising aspect woven into these patterns. Women being drawn to men who provoke unconscious feelings tied not just to power dynamics, but also trust, or rather, its delicate absence. Picture Claire, a 28-year-old software engineer living near San Francisco's Mission District. Claire noticed she often felt inexplicably suspicious or guarded around new partners, even those who seemed perfectly kind and steady on paper. She wasn't paranoid, but sensed something beneath surface interactions stirring unease. Her experience highlights something many overlook. Trust isn't simply built overnight, nor guaranteed by gestures alone. It connects deeply with how safety was experienced early on, whether people were dependable or inconsistent caregivers. But here comes the subtle catch. Sometimes women are drawn toward men who unconsciously trigger old wounds around trust because it feels oddly familiar, even if it causes anxiety later. I remember sitting with Claire last summer under redwood trees at Muir Woods while soft sunlight filtered through leaves overhead. She explained dating someone new who was emotionally reserved, not distant exactly, but careful about sharing feelings, which left Claire oscillating between curiosity and unease. Initially, Claire thought she was being too sensitive until noticing similar patterns repeating throughout past relationships. A slow drip of doubt, followed by brief moments of relief when things seemed fine again. This cycle resembles what Jung described as shadow elements, parts hidden from conscious view, yet influencing behavior behind the scenes. In relationships, shadows can manifest as fears or insecurities projected onto partners without direct awareness. So, how might you explore this dynamic personally? Try this reflective practice. Recall a recent interaction where trust felt shaky or uncertain, not necessarily dramatic, but enough to cause hesitation. And ask yourself, what memories or feelings does this uncertainty bring up? Is there something from my past making it hard to fully believe someone else will stay present emotionally? Write down your thoughts, even if they seem unrelated at first. Sometimes connections emerge gradually through reflection, rather than all at once. Then ask yourself gently if these past experiences are still relevant now, or if they're old stories being replayed that don't serve your current desires for connection and safety. If writing feels too abstract, try verbalizing these questions out loud while walking or doing some mundane task. Our brains sometimes reveal insights when distracted from pressure-filled thinking. Claire found this simple practice illuminating. It didn't erase all mistrust immediately, but created space for compassion toward herself instead of frustration directed outwardly at partners. And again, humor made its way into our chats because Claire joked about how trust issues felt like having an internal security guard constantly checking IDs, even for friends bringing coffee over. And yes, I appreciated the irony, as caffeine paranoia is my specialty too. The point here isn't perfection, but gradual awareness leading toward healthier choices. Not just chasing affection, but cultivating genuine emotional safety wherever possible. By now, you may be noticing a pattern emerging beyond individual behaviors, a web connecting emotions like fear, longing, control, and vulnerability across personal histories into present relationships. That web isn't destiny. It's more like a script waiting to be rewritten consciously rather than acted out unconsciously forevermore. And that requires patience mixed with courage, the willingness to look beneath attraction's surface instead of rushing toward easy explanations or quick fixes, which are tempting but rarely lasting. Before moving on from these reflections, if you found yourself nodding along or recognizing something uncomfortable yet familiar, I invite you gently. What small step could you take today toward naming one unconscious pattern showing up repeatedly? Maybe share it quietly with someone trusted, or jot it down privately as an act of kindness toward yourself. Recognizing is halfway through changing, and sharing softens isolation common when dealing with emotional puzzles few discuss openly enough. Later, we'll see how all these threads connect further, but each insight is valuable on its own, because relationships aren't just about finding the right person, but becoming more whole through choices informed by deeper self-understanding instead of repeated scripts handed down silently through generations, or worse, the internet memes we chuckle over. Oh, and since I'm sure some might wonder, yes, I've stumbled plenty times falling into old traps myself, because apparently none of us get exemption cards. But there's hope in knowing patterns can shift when met with curiosity rather than judgment. That little crack lets fresh air in, even on cloudy days. If any part of today's reflections sparked questions or personal stories rise up unexpectedly, as they tend to do, I genuinely love reading what comes up below in comments, because real change happens not only inside us, but also through shared human connection. And hey, it beats scrolling endlessly hoping for answers popping out randomly. All right, next time we'll jump into even more revealing reasons women find themselves attracted repeatedly towards certain types, including ones harder to spot at first glance, but equally powerful beneath surface charm. Until then, keep noticing those subtle nudges inside. Even discomfort holds clues worth exploring carefully. If any part of today's reflections sparked questions or personal stories rise up unexpectedly, as they tend to do, I genuinely love reading what comes up below in comments, because real change happens not only inside us, but also through shared human connection. And hey, it beats scrolling endlessly hoping for answers popping out randomly. All right, next time we'll jump into even more revealing reasons women find themselves attracted repeatedly towards certain types, including ones harder to spot at first glance, but equally powerful beneath surface charm. Until then, keep noticing those subtle nudges inside. Even discomfort holds clues worth exploring carefully. Whenever you'd like me to continue with step 3, just so. You know, sometimes the most surprising part of these relationship patterns is not what we expect at first glance. After all, the emotional avoidance, power struggles, and trust hesitations, there's one final thread that often weaves itself quietly through many women's choices: the subtle pull toward men who embody a paradoxical mix of vulnerability and emotional intensity, but in ways that feel overwhelming or destabilizing rather than comforting. I recall a moment last winter in Chicago when I met Emma, a 26-year-old ballet instructor living in Logan Square. She told me about her recent relationship with Alex, a man whose mood swings swung like a pendulum between deep affection and sudden withdrawal. Emma described how she felt swept up in intense highs, moments where he seemed to bare his soul, and crushing lows where silence or explosive anger took over without warning. She said it was intoxicating but exhausting, as if riding waves she couldn't predict or control. At first glance, one might say Emma was drawn to someone emotionally rich and expressive, which sounds healthy, until you realize that this intensity wasn't always balanced by stability or respect for boundaries. In fact, such patterns can echo unconscious scripts connected to early experiences of emotional overwhelm or enmeshment. Jung's explorations into the psyche reveal that beyond archetypes like animus or shadow, there is also the complex interplay of feelings that get internalized and reenacted through relationships, sometimes as reenactments of chaotic emotional environments that felt familiar in childhood. Emma's story illustrates how women can be unconsciously drawn toward emotional storms because beneath them lie longings for connection that were unmet safely before. The intensity feels like passion, but actually masks fears around loss and unpredictability. Here's an exercise inspired by this dynamic. Next time you find yourself attracted to someone whose emotions swing dramatically, try pausing to notice your body's reaction during those moments. The tension in your shoulders, rapid heartbeat, or shallow. There is also the complex interplay of feelings that get internalized and reenacted through relationships, sometimes as reenactments of chaotic emotional environments that felt familiar in childhood. Emma's story illustrates how women can be unconsciously drawn toward emotional storms because beneath them lie longings for connection that were unmet safely before. The intensity feels like passion, but actually masks fears around loss and unpredictability. Here's an exercise inspired by this dynamic. Next time you find yourself attracted to someone whose emotions swing dramatically, try pausing to notice your body's reaction during those moments, the tension in your shoulders, rapid heartbeat, or shallow breath. Then ask internally, is this intensity nurturing me or draining me? What feelings inside me is it stirring? Write down your observations without judgment. Then consider what healthy emotional expression looks like for you. Consistent kindness, open communication without volatility, mutual respect for limits. This practice helps differentiate between genuine connection and unconscious reenactment of emotional chaos, a crucial step toward choosing relationships aligned with inner balance instead of turmoil. Back in Chicago, Emma realized her attraction was less about Alex himself and more about trying to fix unresolved feelings tied to her own childhood, where emotions were unpredictable yet deeply impactful. Recognizing this opened space for her to seek relationships marked by steadiness alongside depth, a combination she hadn't allowed herself to prioritize before. If you're sensing something similar unfolding inside you, that pull toward emotional extremes masked as love, you're not alone. And awareness here isn't about giving up on passion, but choosing it consciously instead of repeating old patterns unconsciously. Now imagine standing at a crossroads, not knowing which path leads away from familiar pain, but trusting that curiosity will guide your steps better than fear ever could. It's daunting, but also deeply freeing once you catch even a glimpse beyond repetition. Here comes something vital. These patterns aren't personal failings or curses. They are echoes from stories inherited silently across lifetimes, stories begging for acknowledgement so they lose their grip. When you start naming these invisible influences one by one, the avoidance dance, power struggles masked as care, trust shadows lurking beneath surface calm, emotional storms hiding unmet needs, you begin threading together a new narrative where choice replaces habit and self-awareness softens confusion into clarity. This isn't about quick fixes or perfect outcomes, because human hearts resist neat boxes, but it is about stepping into responsibility for your own story with gentleness rather than blame. And yes, it takes courage, not because you have to be fearless, but because you must welcome discomfort as companion on the way forward, something Jung implied when discussing individuation, not as heroic conquest, but gradual coming home to all parts of self. What if freedom from repeating these cycles doesn't come from finding the right person out there, but from becoming the person willing to see themselves fully, the messy parts too? This radical acceptance shifts how attraction works, from unconscious impulses driven by survival instincts toward conscious choices rooted in wholeness and care. Picture Maya again, now choosing partners who reflect her newfound steadiness rather than old fears, and feeling relief ripple through moments that once sparked anxiety. Or Claire, softly releasing mistrust, not by ignoring it, but by inviting dialogue within herself first before reacting. Or Naomi, embracing the power inside her voice rather than shrinking away when others try to take control, as if reclaiming ground lost long ago, yet never truly forgotten. These shifts are slow ripples, not tidal waves, and they don't erase pain overnight, but transform their meaning from chains into teachers guiding toward growth. So here's a gentle invitation. Allow yourself to sit with discomfort, not as enemy, but guide, when patterns surface, reminding you something needs attention here. Don't rush away or stuff feelings down. Lean closer with curiosity instead. Maybe talk aloud what you notice. Maybe journal fragments. Maybe just breathe into uneasy moments while reminding yourself change isn't linear nor tidy and doesn't require perfection either. Because honestly, we're all works in progress, walking paradoxes, craving love, yet fearing loss, seeking connection, yet guarding wounds invisible to casual glance. That tension holds enormous creative potential, if only we dare meet it honestly instead of running scared back into old scripts no longer serving us well. And speaking personally, I've stumbled plenty times, falling back into old stories despite knowing better, because apparently self-awareness alone doesn't grant immunity. But each stumble became lesson etched deeper than any surface insight could reach, reminding me transformation lives less in grand breakthroughs and more in persistent, small awakenings woven through everyday life like quiet threads strengthening fabric over time. In closing, and I hope this lands softly on your heart, remember attraction isn't a random lottery nor mere habit. It reflects invitations sent from within, patiently waiting for recognition and healing. Choosing differently means listening deeply to fears tangled with hopes, shadows mingled with light, past stories whispering truths still alive today. Not with guilt, but with compassion born from understanding complexity inside us all. So maybe next time your heart flutters unexpectedly or hesitates before leaning in, pause just long enough to ask, who am I being drawn toward? And who am I becoming as I follow this path? Those questions hold seeds not just for better relationships, but for richer encounters with others and, most importantly, with yourself, exactly as you are right now. imperfectly beautiful puzzle pieces fitting slowly into place beyond any preconceived picture. If any part of this resonates or raises questions hard to face alone, I'd really love hearing your thoughts below, because sharing these journeys turns isolation into belonging faster than silent suffering ever could. Plus, it's way more fun. Thank you so much for walking this piece together today. It means more than words can say. To choose curiosity over comfort zones, honesty over denial, growth over stasis isn't easy, but it's profoundly worth it every step along the way. Until next time, keep noticing those subtle nudges inside, even when they unsettle. And remember, every pattern recognized is a small victory won on the road toward freedom few dare travel, yet many long for quietly beneath surface calm. Whenever you're ready for another script or topic, just let me know.